Okay, here we are on this lovely Sunday, beginning of April, and really grateful to have Erik Assadourian with us, and many, many others, familiar faces, old dear friends, and new faces as well, to talk about, well, doing nothing, our favorite topic, right? So let's get started doing nothing together, talking about doing nothing together. Erik, I'll leave it to you. You want to introduce yourself and say why you're here, and you some slides you said I think you want to share. So the proverbial floor
Yeah,
is yours.
I'm going to just share first and then I'll do that.
Okay,
See if we can do that.
thank you for coming.
You tell me if let's see. There we go. All right, everybody can see that? Well, thank you, Jonathan, and also to Jeremiah for helping to organize this. I'm very happy to talk about do nothing with a community who fully understands the value of doing nothing. So I'm going to just keep my remarks somewhat brief because I'd love to just really have time for discussion. But I wanted to start because this idea came about 2 years ago, and it was very much in that initial explanation of it, why we needed it. But I think in more recent time, about a year ago, I started leading forest bathing sessions in the town of Middletown. And I feel like one of the exercises that I lead somewhat often, which is a conversation with a tree, really made it clear how valuable doing nothing is. If you think about a tree, they give back so much more than they take, right? They're absorbing carbon, they're providing habitat, creating food, nurturing other trees in their community, building soil, drawing up water and sending it into the air to sustain the global hydrological cycle. And yet they seem like they're doing nothing, right? They're barely growing, they're barely moving. They're just very much, as zen as you can get. So, it was a moment where I sat down with this tree here in a local park in Middletown, where that really became clear. It had a beautiful spot next to a tiny little stream, and I got a lot of wisdom from that moment. Unlike us, unlike the busy bee, the busy ant, or the busy humans that are constantly going. And I think this is a lesson that we really need to learn more and more, right? We're constantly being asked to do more in our activism, in our local community events, in our board commitments. Some of you probably have all of these that I'm saying, or some of them, or in the future, you'll be being asked to do more. But in our workplaces, both formally, perhaps in our job themselves, or in informal office greening committees, within our religious communities, as they try to green, as donors, and even as just individuals being bombarded with more and more information that we feel like we have to keep up with so that we can understand what's going on. And honestly, the feeling that we have to do more and more and more is not wrong. Just last week, the IPCC synthesis report, had really ominous words, that there is a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. And then that was the one punch. The two punch in that 1-2 was the choices and actions implemented in this decade will have impacts now and for thousands of years. And no pressure. I mean, the feeling of stress just reading that we have, what we do now not only matters to our children and grandchildren, but 20 generations from now. So that's really adds to that feeling that we have to do more and more and more, and it can spark overwhelmment and even burnout. And a few years ago, I helped with a book called Stone Soup for a Sustainable World. And And it's a nice book, a good introduction to eco-activism that really kind of draws lots of personal stories of young heroes, of entrepreneurs. But the disturbing part was how many of these young entrepreneurs, because some of these stories started being chronicled for the book a few years before the book came out, and the individuals who were leaders briefly had already burned out, like a shooting star, proverbially speaking, where they just had a few years of intense activism and then just ran out of steam. And that's not the first time I've seen that. I mean, it's a regular conversation online and in kind of environmental media. But even when I was a young activist in the early 2000s, working for the U.S. PIRG, or Public Interest Research Group, I watched lots of colleagues who were pushed too far, pushed too hard, not really psychologically supported well, and they burned out. And some became, they just left the movement. And that was disturbing to see then, and it's even more disturbing to see now when there's so much that we have to do. So the goal is to not hit the wall, especially when we have a climate crisis to deal with, and then a dozen other interlocking sustainability challenges, right? The overwhelmment of plastics, toxic chemicals like PFAS. I don't want to list, the dozen big challenges that we're facing, but we have to address all of these, and it's becoming harder each year as more disasters happen, as more of our energy and our resources inevitably go to cleaning up the disasters that are coming from climate change and the rest. So if we push ourselves too fast, too hard, never take a break, don't pace ourselves right, we're going to hit that proverbial wall and just burn out and walk away. And if you do the math over a lifetime, is it better to put in 2 years intensely into environmental issues, or 50 years slowly paced out well, total time and total effort and effect, it's going to be sustaining a longer period is going to win out over such a short activism way. But I would kind of transition to, this is not just at the individual level that we're seeing so much frenetic energy, but at the societal level, right? We have this understanding that to get out of the climate crisis, we have to do more and more and more. Right now, it's framed around the energy transition, around making more and more electric vehicles and solar panels, and on and on and on. But ironically, what we really need to do is degrow, is to slow down. This is not a revolutionary idea, even though it is seemingly a fringe idea. Experts like Lester Brown, William Catton, and so many others, Herman Daly, for example, all in the 70s were talking about the need to create a steady state economy, to slow down, to stabilize population, like Paul Ehrlich was talking about again in the 70s. And yet, for some reason, not for some reason, but for clear profit-based growth and capitalist reasons, we have instead reframed that to let's grow our way out of a crisis. But ironically, climate change is not the crisis. It's a symptom of our overshoot crisis, of our overconsumption, of our overpopulation crisis. And the only solution to that is to slow down, ironically. So, recognizing that that we need to slow down and stop producing more is a key point, both on that individual level and the societal, cultural, economic level. And yet, the news that we see every day is that we need to do more, consume more, produce more. Just this week, the International Renewable Energy Agency said that we need to grow our renewable energy capacity by 1,000 gigawatts every year. We need to increase renewable energy investments by $5 trillion every year. A week before that, Bloomberg said we need to grow our transmission lines by $21 trillion, right? And mining needs to grow, and mines happen to be for a large part on indigenous lands. But well, once again, we have to make some hard choices. Is this kind of rhetoric going on in the energy transition realm where we have to produce more and yay, we'll get some green jobs out of it and we'll get to a sustainable future. But in reality, we're going to mine more, we're going to dig up this deep seas to find minerals there, and on and on. And so that's a whole talk in its own right. And in fact, it's coming up on April 19th at 2 p.m. Let's see here. Yeah, at 2 p.m. Eastern. John Mulrow, Bill Reese, who founded the Eco Footprint Indicator, and Miriam Stevens will talk about this as part of a Faith Climate Action Week. So I did want to plug that right now because I think you all would probably enjoy that. And it really gets to this bigger point that globally we need to recognize the importance of degrowth. But today there's that complementary element of recognizing that degrowing individually, slowing down, doing nothing, is incredibly important as well. I think what I want to then kind of bring up now and spend just the last few minutes of my time is to really talk about, well, what does that mean? What do you do on Do Nothing Day, right? And Gary Snyder, the poet, actually said it best, I think, long time ago. The most radical thing you can do is stay home. Sometimes, even in our way we consume, right? How we travel, how we seek out, new opportunities to explore the world. Even how we consume and enjoy our lives is incredibly consumptive. But the idea behind Sabbaths and specifically Do Nothing for the Climate Day is just to enjoy doing nothing, right? The philosopher Christopher Robin said it just as well as Gary Snyder. What I like doing best is nothing, right? So what are some of those ways that we can do nothing? And I, most importantly, and not easy to do necessarily, is to take the day off of work. That doesn't mean quietly quitting for the day, although I guess that's an option. But really, I mean, just take one of your leave days, personal leave or vacation days, and just, announce that I'm going to do nothing today. It's Do Nothing for the Climate Day. And then get outside and meditate. Jonathan and I were just talking about before the conversation, the value of meditation. And meditation, especially outside in nature, is one of those core Gaian practices for me, making sure every morning I get out there and, sometimes it's an internal meditation, just, thinking or slowing down thinking. Sometimes it's letting go of those thoughts and just observing nature, watching the squirrel scurry up and down the river birch in my tiny little backyard, or every once in a while the squirrel will come right up to me because he doesn't realize I'm there because I'm sitting quietly. But just to really kind of be out there and observe the natural cycles and quiet one's mind. As well, take a hike or a walk or a bike ride, ideally in a way that you don't need to drive there and burn fossil fuels, or even if you have an EV, the renewable energy and cause some damage. Try to stay local, in other words, and just get out in nature or enjoy the day, including exercise, taking a swim, doing some yoga, capoeira, or karate, just whatever you enjoy and rejuvenate from. A lot of the point of this is to nurture, to do a little self-care on Do Nothing for the Climate Day, which ironically also helps the climate, right? If we're slowing down, if we're not streaming Netflix all day, or going out to restaurants or driving off to another city to go explore it, but just staying locally, meditating, doing a little yoga in the backyard or in your living room. All that is very low consumptive, is very healing, and has some ecological benefits in just its pure slowing down rhythmic elements. Same with cooking a meal rather than going out, something healthy, something nourishing, something low ecological impact. Just have a cup of tea, just slow down and take a tea break. Visit with friends, or if they're not nearby, call somebody you haven't talked to for a while. Play with your kids. I almost didn't include that because I hope anyone who has kids is playing with their kids, but just a reminder. And read a good book. I'm almost embarrassed to say that it was only recently that I read The Grapes of Wrath for the first time, and it was one of the best books I've ever read. And I think there is a lot of opportunities to benefit from the literature that we might have missed when we were younger. And so finding a good book, whether that's even on audio, if that's what you need to get through it, that is admittedly my predilection these days, even though it uses electricity. It gets me reading. And so there's a value to that. And most importantly, go to bed early. I think there's clearer and clearer evidence that when you don't sleep enough, it affects your health. It affects your psychological well-being. And this, if any of you have gone camping in the past, and it gets dark and you're off your devices and there's no indoor lights to extend the day, you get sleepy early. And there's something joyful about just letting the natural rhythms of the day kind of bring you to an earlier bedtime. So, just embracing that and getting to bed early is another way to celebrate Do Nothing for the Climate Day. And then I would balance that with all the ways to not celebrate Do Nothing for a Climate Day. Some are maybe surprising, but this is the point. The Do Nothing for the Climate Day means also not fighting for the earth that day. Don't join a protest. Don't write to Congress. Don't pick up litter. Don't catch up on work or on the news, right? Those are things that you think, oh, well, this is my day, like Earth Day or like World Environment Day. I should be active. But the whole idea is that if you do go for a hike, you can pick up the garbage that you see some other time. Just enjoy the time in nature. But also don't binge on media and don't stay up late, right? Just really focus on self-care, on relaxing, on regrouping, so that you can keep going with your work in the future, right? The idea of this came a couple of years ago. We put up a little petition on change.org to see if we could just kind of stimulate people thinking about it. It's still up. I invite you to sign the petition. But even more importantly, I invite you on the second Thursday of May to just take a day to do nothing for the climate. And why that day? It's it's completely arbitrary, ultimately, like all somewhat made up holidays would be. But the idea was to pick halfway between Earth Day and World Environment Day, because not everybody celebrates Earth Day. In Europe, World Environment Day is more relevant. If you're going to celebrate both, this is that moment right in between two busy activism days, or too busy, picking up litter or engaging in the community days, and just a chance to really slow down and pause in between those two. So I will pause there. I think, as I think everyone on this call would agree, we need more Sabbath opportunities to just slow down, to reflect on life, to consume and produce less, and Do Nothing for the Climate Day is just one attempt to do that. And I'm looking forward to chatting about it more.
All right, beautiful, Erik. Thank you so much for sharing all that.
You bet.
I love it. I had a lot I can say, but I'll wait. Anyone have any thoughts, questions? I can just read from Andy Blosser. Excellent presentation. Oh, I just lost it. I'm curious. Well, where'd it go?
I could ask my question in
Yeah,
person.
please
okay,
do.
go for it. Okay, yeah.
And then Marilyn, sorry, I saw your hand too, but go ahead, Andy, and then Marilyn. How about that?
I'm sorry. Thank you so much. I didn't realize how much I had written there, and I apologize for that. So to summarize what my question is, it's a beautiful presentation, and I love this idea. I am just wondering how to present these ideas, because I really like everything that you said there, and I have other questions as well, especially about the forest, the Gaian component of that, which I'm much less familiar with. But I'm curious about the rhetoric behind this, and how to present this in a way that's winsome, that is rhetorically effective to people, many of whom may be working and may be frantic and constantly engaged in activity, not because they choose to necessarily, but because they have to. And so in my question, I bring up the fact that so many people have insecure housing, at least here in the United States. And those of you who are, excuse me, near New York City, of course, I'm in Chicago. In New York City, I've heard statistics indicating that you need to be making 6 figures in US dollars in order to just be above the poverty line, just to not be paying an egregious amount of your money in housing. And so I'm wondering, how do we present not only this idea of doing nothing for a day, which is something that you are advocating for, which is wonderful, but the broader concept of degrowth, which is a term that I've used and I like it. I love the idea behind it. I get this reaction from people often. Well, we don't have the things. We have a lot of things we don't need that we're making all the time, but then we don't have the things that we really need. And it almost seems like there's an artificial scarcity of those things. And I'm just wondering, how do you present that rhetorically? How do you approach people who are suffering scarcity, or perhaps it's artificial scarcity, or who are realistically worrying about losing their housing or things that they really need to survive, or healthcare, or any number of those other things which are very expensive here in the United States? How do you present that idea to them in a persuasive way? Does that make sense? Sorry.
It makes 100% sense, and that is a full lecture right there. So when I was I didn't give much of a background of my work, but I was at the World Watch Institute as a researcher for about 17 years. And several of those years I focused specifically on this question of economic degrowth as a strategy, as a mechanism to get us towards sustainability. And not just everywhere, because you're right, that doesn't make sense. But the work that I focused on was the path to economic degrowth in overdeveloped countries, right? So this is not, necessarily being applied to, the lowest income countries, right? There needs to be some growth towards sustainability, but if we're honest, where we have to contract our consumption globally a lot to get to sustainability, that means the most developed countries like the US, which is heavily overdeveloped in many ways, needs to shrink its consumption, right? So, one of the side effects at the personal level of our growth fetish is the overweight and obesity epidemic, right? And that's not because people are weak. It's because you have the food industry spending billions of dollars getting us to eat the most processed and lowest nutrient foods they can. And that's not conspiratorial. That's just, good business, right? If you have subsidized corn and you can make corn syrup, and you can put it in your food, that's a lot cheaper than growing vegetables and all those things. So some of what needs to be done, I mean, a lot of this is regulatory reform and, better taxation, better redirecting of those new resources to public goods, right? Amazon, it wouldn't be as needed if you doubled the funding towards libraries, right? Everybody wouldn't be so excited about the electric vehicle, transition if every street had bike lanes and good bus routes. So, a lot of it is the societal choices that we're making. But as far as making degrowth popular, I mean, it really is, Lisa Maria made the point in the comments, the luxury of stepping off the hamster wheel. This isn't necessarily going to appeal to those who are, barely making ends meet, and can't take a day off. I admit I'm speaking from a deep level of privilege here that I can take a day off, although I technically haven't been a staff employed person forever. So taking a day off is, just not working and not being paid. So, but I earn enough, or I'm secure enough, luckily because of a good landlord, because I moved away from expensive DC to a quieter, simpler, cheaper place, and others, choices, that I can take a day. But so I think the key is to, celebrate degrowth at that individual scale of showing the psychological benefits of eating healthier, of slowing down, of getting enough sleep, and complementing that with the societal reforms necessary to shift priorities away from growth and consumption, and profit to sustaining well-being for the most people as we can. Your long question, or intricate question, demanded an intricate answer.
Right.
Marilyn, if you have questions still.
Thank you so much for highlighting the complexity of this. And I find in my research, I wrote a book called An Oasis in Time, How a Day of Rest Can Save Your Life. And in the research, I found what you're finding, that all these issues are interconnected, that they do come down to a deep sense, I think, that we don't have value when we don't take action. That underneath, there are driving deep psychological and cultural forces that are driving the sense that it's never enough. Nothing is ever enough. So I think whatever it takes any of us to create a day of doing nothing is an encounter. It's not, I really appreciated your list of what to do, but I also think it should be, or I suggest, a set of thoughts, what to think. What can I be thinking? And what can I be believing as I take this day off? Because we're not slackers, we're not lazy. And the whole issue of privilege is also complex. As you know, someone who's close to my immigrant past and my husband's immigrant parents, the whole issue of what is privilege, how does it show up? Is it related to how much money you have and how much freedom? We're certainly talking about Passover this week, and one of our great pharaohs, I believe one of the great dictators, is the tyranny of empty achievement. Well, I could talk a lot, but I will stop right there.
But it's an excellent comment. Yeah, I think for me, it was that conversation with the tree that really made me realize how much we feel like if we're not doing something, we're not being, we're not doing enough, right? But just taking in more carbon than you release, like just that the tree is really a wonderful guide in how much you can do while being quiet. So thank you, Marilyn, for that comment.
And I really thank you for this. And I'd like to participate in anything that you and others are doing to let people know about the day, which is May 11th, I believe,
That's right,
2023.
yep.
To what are you doing to bring this forth? Like the Bioneers Conference, for example, is here in Berkeley starting on Thursday. Are you appealing to them to mention to this? I think it would be a great thing to do.
I think we're not doing enough, truthfully. It's not part of the philosophy of doing nothing, but it's a, we're a small community, and we spread the word a little bit here and a little bit there, and
Okay.
But we would love your help if you have ideas of ways to share this with either with the Pioneers community or with anybody who you think would be excited about this. Yeah.
Okay, well, I can be in touch, and that community, I think, would be open to what you're doing.
Great, thank you.
May I jump in?
Any other? Yeah, Kara, go ahead.
Okay. So I'd like to explore with everyone here the dovetail between doing nothing and impressions of sacrifice and illusions of deprivation, and really getting to the root or the entangled, ever re-entangling roots of these interlocking oppressions that dictate what is something of value or something that is simply feeding into capitalist norms of productivity and taken for granted standard of living in our convenience culture. And what does it mean not just to have a day, but where we integrate into our consciousnesses and our children's consciousnesses ways of being that are inherently joyful and complementary, that are about co-evolution, where we are redefining sacrifice. For example, in my school bus now, we live in our converted tiny home school bus, and this is not a one-day event. It's not a one-year event, or I did that for a couple of years. This is a life commitment. And even, Eric, what you said about people burning out and then leaving the movement. How do we leave something that is implicit in our soul? So there's something, I think, fundamentally askew in how we are languaging a lot of this. And perhaps, Andy, this goes to your question about the rhetoric. I think it really behooves us as activists and deactivists to really to be digging collectively. Again, the simultaneity, Eric, as you spoke of, the individual and the complementary social structures, addressing infrastructure and policy simultaneously. And when we're using the language of privilege, when we're using the language of nothing, of doing, there's a certain reifying, there's a certain reification that I think can be quite dangerous. And we have to be cautious, in particular in our practice of sacrifice, of redefining productivity. So we're not just reenacting unconsciously these consumer addicting norms in the act of doing nothing.
Yeah,
and I put in the chat for people who are interested, one of my articles about Jevons paradox, which is rooted in concepts of efficiency that, of course, are all about maintaining capitalist consumptive norms. And how do we shift from that into an ecozoic, mutually beneficial frame of deep time, where we're not just racing against the clock, but where our relationship to one another, ourselves, and the objects around us are rooted in a kind of intimacy, a storytelling, like you're saying with a tree, an interspecies storytelling, an interspecies intimacy.
Yeah, those are all excellent points, and you addressed it to the whole group, and I don't want to be the talking head necessarily to respond to everything. So if somebody has a strong opinion, I have lots of thoughts, and I would like to address some of them, but I don't need to speak first if somebody had some replies to that.
Erik, since you're our special guest here, why don't you start us off? And if anyone
Yeah.
else wants to contribute, they can follow you.
That's fine. But thank you, Jonathan and Cara. That was a really important point. And even the term I like, deactivist. That's very cool. And yes, we don't want to marginalize this to an individual day. And in fact, going back to Andy's question about meditation, I'm part of a Gaian community, that we recognize that we're part of a living earth and that we're utterly dependent on it. And it is our role to help heal and not save the earth, but save ourselves as part of the earth. So recognizing that there is an eco-spirituality that we can frame our lives around is a 365-day-a-year proposition. Do nothing for the climate day is a little playful attempt to kind of make a public version of this that might kind of draw people into this idea of questioning growth, of questioning constantly doing more, either as a consumer dream striving type thing, or even as an activist trying to do more and more and more. Either one of those is dangerous for different reasons. So kind of having this conversation around degrowth in this kind of safer and more fun way, like Post Growth Institute's Free Money Day, right? Or 100 other kind of made up, kind of holidays to kind of get the conversation started. So that's, I think, part of the drive of that. But I also think, people leave the environmental movement because, they're asked to do too much or they're not supported. But I don't see that as different than, people leaving Christianity or their specific church or whatever religious community that doesn't feel like it nurtures them anymore or supports them anymore. In fact, that's what kind of brought me from being a sustainability researcher to a eco-spirituality practitioner. I wanted something more holistic, something that actually was nurturing, community building, and felt more meaningful than professional environmentalism, which very much has been critiqued since the 70s by people like Arne Naess, who say, shallow ecology it's constantly reactive. It's not really creating the values or kind of cultural change that we really need to get beyond consumerism or capitalism.
Right. Very good. Anyone else? No? Yeah. Alicia, yeah, go ahead. Great to see you. Good to have you here.
Thank you. I want to respond to what you said, Cara. I think that the joy is really important. And I just want to underscore that. Erik, even when you talked about looking for the language here, the IPPC said, what our choices and actions need to be. It's all about choices and actions, and it's not about the experience of joy, the experience of beauty, and putting those things first before action, I think is crucially important.
Absolutely.
I sometimes feel like, all of these intersecting desires, values that Erik, you're trying to bring into being one day a year, but obviously much, much more than that. And the same things, we're trying to do in terms of green Sabbath and other kinds of things. It's how do you build an entirely new society? I mean, that's what I feel like ultimately I'm trying to wrestle with. And these are all just vehicles, and they're all potentially very, very powerful, ideally speaking. But Yeah, the what you were saying about moving from what you call professional activism. I mean, it seems to me you didn't want to just be pointing towards something, you wanted to be living it. You wanted to be experiencing it in the here and now, and not just being standing against something, not just arguing, no, no, no. Which also makes total sense. So how, Erik, do you feel about where things stand for this coming May? This is the second year, you said? The third year?
This is the third year, yeah, and it's not all that formally organized, right? It's not like we're coming together. Even virtually, we're not coming together. That's defeating the whole point. It's being free to think as well, not just do, as Marilyn pointed out, just relax, or and to answer Andy's new question, I mean, to get comfortable with doing nothing, right? I mean, there's a point where you don't do nothing for so long that it's a new source of stress. And I would encourage, Andy, if you already do feel that, to just try sitting out on your back step or wherever, or front step if you don't have a back step that has a little bit of green space, wherever you can, and each morning, just for 5 minutes, try it for 5 minutes and just sit quietly. And don't get angry or upset if you can't keep your mind quiet, because you're never going to keep it fully quiet. You might extend it over time between interruptive thoughts, but just taking moments to revel in the pause, in the nothing, starts to rebuild. I mean, if you try to just do that once a year, it's going to be difficult. But if you kind of integrate that practice more regularly, that's kind of a step forward. But Jonathan, the bigger question you're asking is one that might be upsetting, or my answer might be upsetting. But I also think that all these efforts, Green Sabbath, the Gaian Way, the other work that so many people are doing to kind of sow seeds, cultural shifts. I think for me, I've always seen that as kind of the seeds that are the culture, the pioneer species, right? I used to call them the cultural pioneers, right? But the idea is that when the consumer culture buckles, and it's not a if, I mean, ecologically speaking, it's just not possible to see the long-term future for the industrial consumer culture as it stands today, with this number of people, with this much throughput and all that. We're just pushing way too much onto the ecological systems that we depend on. So there will be major disruptions, and there, like a fire, those seeds of the pioneer species will be the ones that sprout first. And there will be opportunity to help shift cultures suddenly and rapidly in new ways. And that doesn't necessarily mean good ways either. There are lots of scenarios where the bad species, the invasive species that have, high resistance to fire or whatever, to overly kill this metaphor, are going to kind of sprout first. And the eco initiatives that were kind of first developing in eco villages and in kind of little pockets here and there don't make it. But with recognition that, what we're doing today might feel quixotic, but these consumer systems will not survive forever. And so what we're building here today might take root in the not too far off future. So that's what kind of keeps me going, and keeps me from burnout, truthfully, that and pacing. right? I mean, not working too hard, not pushing too hard, not feeling bad that do nothing for the climate day is more of an idea than a movement. Because, you know, I don't have 100 hours a day. And so I'm really excited that Marilyn, you're excited to help spread the word. And if anyone else wants to too, that's wonderful. But I'm also, I accept if it just is a crazy idea. That's kind of how that kind of, you know, I'm trying to absorb the wisdom from history, including Zen and just kind of a quiet efforts.
Right. I think that's a great attitude. I see a bunch of people now. Lisa, go ahead. Wanna jump in?
Sure. Anyway, again, thank you so much. It's super inspiring and it's also really fun. I think some of the things I was thinking about, I loved that this came in your relationship to a conversation with the tree. And I've been trying to, I'm so obsessed, you know, with the fact that obviously what's happening with the climate, my responsibility as a mother, sort of taking my life really seriously, that it could matter what I do and how I am, that kind of feeling of responsibility. And at the same time, trying to shift my relationship to the world, actually say, okay, I'm in this sort of consumer society, and I would like to consciously shift my relationship to have a different reference. And I think that's what's interesting in your conversation with the tree and the idea of the Do Nothing Day is to have a different reference, having the reference be nature, having that time to listen to the plants and what, you know, respond to the insects and understand ourselves as one species within many, you know, millions of species, and how we stand in that relation. So I think that this is something obviously that we should take really seriously. Our lives are serious. This fun idea is a great idea. And what Marilyn says too, how can we support, how can we work strategically together? Because in the end, it's kind of our rhythmic response, our mutual response to Greek Sabbath, or this you know, Do Nothing Day. When we do things rhythmically together, we're also not so alone. So I just wanted to say I love the idea. I look forward to celebrating it. It comes right next to my birthday, so I'm even happier because it's kind of like I can really do nothing on my birthday. I love that. So just thank you. I think it's really fun, and I think it invites us to play. And I think that that's one of the things that we really is a useful re-engagement with the world. Is how do we play?
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks. Go ahead, Eric. Did you want to respond?
That was a perfect statement that needs no response other than hooray.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're gonna take the day.
Yeah, Lisa, thank you. All right, Theodore.
All right. So I was thinking out like with talk of degrowth and overshoot and all that overpopulation, it seems like in our world it's really easy when you're talking about those kind of things to put the blame on someone else besides yourself or your group, or say, oh, it's these other people who are the ones causing the problem. And then have that just turn into fueling an old animosity, even to be redirected somewhere else. And it's like, I'm just wondering, how do you stop that from happening? And to make sure that calls for actually reducing consumption aren't just hijacked to act as an excuse to keep the worst off in society you really are, push things even lower. And make sure it actually comes to starting at the top, where this is a place where you start reducing consumption.
Yeah, that's a key and difficult question. Again, I think so much has to happen simultaneously that it makes it difficult. I mean, even just looking at the degrowth movement, which I've been observing since 2010, you know, it's taken way more root in Europe, right? I mean, it's a rounding, no, not even a rounding error in the US. That's too, you know, positive. I mean, there's very little action here around degrowth, you know, versus, you know, giant conferences and conversations going on in Europe. And